Hi folks, with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the issue of a wealth tax, taxing the rich, as it sometimes is called. Now, this is a bit of a conversation that's going across Australia now, and Britain and elsewhere, and even in places where it's not being seriously considered. There is still discussions going on about it. Now, the idea of, well, tax the rich, and there's all sorts of statistics that get brought up saying that the rich own half the wealth of the country and therefore they should pay more tax and so on. Now, all these arguments have, I suppose, elements of merit in them, but are they practical? Are they realistic? Will they produce the desired result? Will they kill off innovation? And will the most productive people in society say, well, if you're going to tax the crap out of me, why should I bother? And so on. So these are all things to consider. Now, they've been, yes, I've been around for a while, so I remember the conversations when I was at high school. I remember in economics class we did a thing about wealth taxes back in the or high tax rates, I guess, was more the issue back in the day. So, and they were discussed, and we looked at various the merits of higher taxes, lower taxes, and so on. Now, the idea is that higher taxes stifle hard work and innovation, and there's certainly a point to that. Low taxes facilitate hard work and innovation. There's also an element of truth to that, but it comes back to the material point, which I always come back to when I look at this sort of debate or discussion, and it gets ideological a lot of the time, is how many people are actually doing productive work. Because if people are doing productive work, finding the cure for cancer and inventing some rocket ship to go to the moon or Mars or whatever, or coming up with some new technology, those people should be, I think, they should have a low tax. Now, whether that low tax comes in the form of actual lower taxes, or they get a tax sort of holiday for a while, or they get higher capacity to write off taxes, or it doesn't matter. But the most productive, innovative, inventive people are going to sweat blood working 24 hours a day to come up with, again, the cure for cancer or some sort of equivalent. They should be I think, among the lower tax people. If they get rich in the process of inventing the cure for cancer, I'm okay with that, because everybody benefits from their hard work. But in the case of cronyism, where people are just gifted very well-paying, prestigious jobs because they're part of some crony buddy stooge network, then or they're just political flunkies or something like that they should be taxed heavily, because they produce nothing, they create nothing, they invent nothing, they further that they don't make a better society or a better world. They're just straight out parasites. They should be taxed heavily. So how do you separate the two? How do you say, well, this person's a parasite, this person's a hard worker? Maybe the person that tries to bust their ass to find the cure for cancer, maybe it doesn't work out. Maybe the whole thing falls over before they've reached the cure. Does that mean that they should therefore be heavily taxed and not? And so there are a few things that go into the mix. Now, in periods where there is great social mobility based on merit, then there's an argument for lower taxes. In situations where innovation, invention are stagnant, as they are today, then there is a case for higher taxes. So let's just sort of separate the two here. World War II and the mass mobilization of people meant that there simply weren't enough people who were skilled, educated, qualified, certified, trained in any field to fill all the jobs that were necessary, whether jobs as gunnery officers or pilots, and it didn't matter wherever you looked, in whether it be in manufacturing or operating machinery or or skills in whatever area, that there just weren't the people there. So the equation flipped into capability. So you would look for people who were quick studies and who were capable. They grasped it quickly, and they were keen enough to run with it and take that responsibility. So there was an entire thing of looking at capability rather than qualifications or credentials. Didn't mean that even at the universities at the time, the majority, and there were some exceptions, obviously, but the majority of people there in universities were the best and the brightest. So they got some jobs like, cracking the codes and doing, if you like, the super heavy intellectual property type jobs, and they got those sort of gigs. And but the universities, what at the time, educational qualifications and capability were very much considered to be pretty much the same. A rigorous education and a rigorous merit-based examination meant that you had that capability. That's of course all changed today with affirmative action, but that capability was assumed, and reasonably so, assumed because of a merit-based rigorous education. Now, outside of that, capability was considered to be, natural capability, aptitude, these sorts of things were introduced into the lexicon, into the practical reality of day-to-day life, and they went on after the war. So, and it continued on for some time. I remember as a kid at school, I remember the teachers were looking out for natural aptitude, and there was a kid that had a natural aptitude for. It could be anything. I mean, they didn't care. This kid had a natural aptitude for athletics, and so he just had that sense of time. He could do cartwheels and somersaults, and he could do all sorts of things, and he's really good at that. So they moved, they encouraged him to take up athletics and things like that, and they would give you extra classes or after school classes. There was a real all across the board effort. It could be you were good at mathematics, for example, or there was a kid who was good at. He used to write, these quite good short stories, and they encouraged him to pursue literature and reading, and they were giving him the young kid, like he'd be 7 years old. So they were giving him reading lists. Have you read Alice in Wonderland? Or this, making sure that he had a very well-rounded. I remember overhearing. How long ago it was, for some reason it stuck in my mind, overhearing the teacher talking to this kid, encouraging him to take on, additional reading and so on, and going through, well, this is why, this book you'll find interesting. And the teacher really trying to encourage the kid to broaden their reading. And again, the kid was a good short story writer. So, and in other fields of endeavour, another kid was particularly good at music. He picked up the reading of music and the notes really quickly, and was quite a competent. He could play, and he just had that impresario sort of capability. He could play, the piano or the glockenspiel or the recorder or something. He could play all sorts of different instruments. He just had this natural aptitude of somehow finding the note. And another kid I'm thinking of here had a great. He had a really good voice, this kid, and so he was encouraged again, singing lessons to get more into music and so on. There was a girl who was. She was like an accomplished ballet dancer or something like that. She was encouraged to pursue that, and the list went on anyway of teachers looking out for natural aptitude, but it related to capability. Your aptitude had to be more or less in line with your capability, just because somebody wanted to be a singer, they had to have a really good voice. So the aptitude had to be there, the capability and the aptitude had to go. This was all lost as time went on, and by the time I got to high school, even, it was already disappearing. So capability was pretty much a dead issue. It wasn't considered that. There were some little sort of patches of it here and there, but really not. Things like affirmative action were already in their very early stages. Nothing like they got to later on. Were already there. This idea that everyone should have a PhD because that will create social equality. So it bypassed merit and it bypassed capability. Now let's look where we are today. The person with the highest income in, say, the road, the road I live in, the person with the highest income is a woman who is the executive director of gender equity in a government department. So the executive director of gender equity, it's not a real job. It's a bullshit. She produces nothing, creates nothing, delivers nothing, builds nothing, creates nothing of value at all. Her job is to make sure that underqualified or non-qualified women, particularly black women, based on what she says, or brown women, get given jobs that they haven't earned, that they're not qualified for, given executive or managerial and supervisory positions, all based on some sort of quota. So it's her job, this woman in the street here, her job is just social engineering to lower productivity standards, to lower output. She does nothing, but she is an absolute and total parasite. Quite a nice lady, by the way, but always to me. But so she's got, she's an absolute parasite to. So now she's the highest paid person in the street. There's a guy who lives a few doors up, and he's construction manager for a small engineering, a smallish. I don't know how many people are in it. Less than 100, I would think. Smallish engineering company, and she would be paid double what he gets paid. I look at the salaries paid for the director of equity, gender equity, or director of social equity at, say, a university, and they're paid $500,000 plus a year, and as are various other people connected with the equity scam. Jobs that are for NGOs, where the only requirement is you've got to scare up a crowd to wave placards on demand, the rent a mob, rent a crowd thing. Those jobs pay $250,000 a year. They're not productive jobs. They produce nothing. They're total parasite jobs, with all sorts of benefits attached. With the benefits and the travel and this, that, the salary is probably quoted probably closer to $350 a year. Well above the average. If I go to the top best paid, most prestigious jobs in Australia on the online job boards, and go down there, I'm lucky if even 15% of them are in the private sector, for productive work. The rest are all quangos, NGOs, government departments, industry associations, which are funded by governments, and this sort of thing. There aren't any hardly any productive jobs. Every one of them, or pretty much 85% of them or more, are just pure parasite jobs, but paying big bucks. Now, I know quite a few people that are well-to-do. As a public servant, he's had a job for life, effectively. I mean, he got. He went to one of the wealthy private schools, and one of his buddies from school got a very senior job in the body politic, and appointed this guy to a lifetime job as a very senior public servant. Now he retired on something like $600,000 a year. Oh, he's due to retire soon, on $600,000 a year, and so very generous pension. And he'll live very well on that. His net worth today is probably 15 million. A lot of that from appreciation of real estate, but nonetheless, he's had a high income for 30 plus years. He's now, if you talk to me, he's never had to attend an interview in his life. He's never had to produce anything, create anything, build anything, add value to anything. He's just been a senior public servant just because he had a buddy in the right place. He doesn't do any work. He's just a fucking parasite. But he lives very, very well. I mean, all off the taxpayer teeth, by the way. Now, there's another guy I know, and there's not a single person I know, not one, who has made a lot of money or is doing particularly well out of innovation, invention, hard work, taking a risk. And risk is an important part of it. If you're not risking anything at all, then I don't know what are you ever going to produce or create or build if you've got a zero risk profile throughout your whole life. Here's another guy. He's he's got it's not waterfront. It's a couple of streets back from the water, but it's up on the hill, so it's got panoramic water views and it's got all the bits and pieces. He's got $300,000 worth of motor vehicles in the driveway. Lives where this guy will drop $100,000 without even blinking on a vacation. More than that. Now, but you talk to this guy. Well, what has he ever built? I mean, has he ever been for an interview in his life? Has he ever risked anything? Yet he's always had multi-million-dollar salaried jobs with lots of benefits. And to give you an idea of how well plugged in he is to the network, he got divorced some years ago. Cost him a lot of money, but they rushed his. They just doubled his salary. So instead of $1 million a year, they were paying him $2 million a year, and then gave him a longer-term contract so that he'd easily replaced his lost, the assets he'd lost in the divorce and so on. He easily replaced that within a few years, and was now richer than he'd ever been. Now I know this guy, and I've had numerous sort of lunches and dinners and chats with him. I wouldn't get him to run a bath. I don't think he could sweep the floor without fucking it up. His views on management and organisation and structure and so on are childlike. I'm listening to him thinking, holy fuck, you don't know anything. And why should he? Why should he know anything? He's never had to risk or strive or study or do any, be proficient, be held accountable for results. He's never had to do anything. He's just been inserted into a very high paying role and it just does the circuit. Same as there are numerous socialites that just sit on boards of directors. Many of them are, they can be pleasant people, they can be cultured, they can quote Shakespeare, they can do it, but they've never had to do anything in their lives, never had to attend an interview, never had to produce, build, create anything of value at all, ever. So these people are the ones that, because we now, capability is not an issue anymore. Affirmative action, diversity, and cronyism has replaced all of that. Merit-based, rigorous education is pretty much gone. The people that are undergoing any sort of rigorous-based education, merit-based, they're not going into the high-paid jobs. Far from it. And I've interviewed and know of engineers, civil engineers. They're building bridges. Now they're paid okay, but they're not paid anywhere near what the diversity director at the local Quango is getting paid. The guy in charge. He's in charge of building some bridge and road, a large infrastructure project, and he's being paid half of what the diversity director at the university is getting paid. So this idea of taxing the rich, how do we identify the rich? Do we say, well, we'll tax you on the basis of the assets you own, the number of properties and houses and so on? Possibly there's merit there. Do we tax you on the wealth you have? How big your retirement savings are? Well, possible there. But the issue is, how do we create an economy where the innovators, the risk takers, the value adders, the hard workers, where they are not singled out for hard tax? Because on one side you've got the diversity director at the university who has been gifted that job through the crony network, and she's getting paid $500,000 a year, or the guy that's busting his ass to find the cure for cancer. Do we both treat them as wealthy and tax the crap out of them? Because on one side you've got someone that's building and creating nothing, and they're just a straight out parasite, or someone who's really going to change the world with the work they're doing. Now, in and amongst the rich, there are some people who are the builders, the creators, the innovators. There are some, just not very many, and there never will be very many. And they used to during, and I remember this certainly in my younger days, that the idea of merit still applied and capability still applied. People could be hired, promoted, rewarded based on capability. They may not necessarily have the degree in an area, but if they had the aptitude and the capability, this is a hangover again from World War II, then they could produce things, but or they could handle those high responsibility jobs where some sort of creativity and productivity was a necessity. But productivity as it exists today has all been pushed down into the lower paid jobs, not into the higher paid jobs, which have become now cronyistic, parasitic, affirmative action, diversity, and so on. So how do we tax this, and how do we reward it? And the issue of tax and reward, or stifling innovation. For example, a CEO of say a large retail chain, in I think it was 1969 or 70, was being paid, give or take, about 5 times what the lowest paid shop worker was, the person working in the warehouse or whatever. So the difference between the highest paid and lowest paid person was only a factor of 5 in a large organization that faced a lot of commercial competition. Now the top paid, but because the tax rates were high, there wasn't really much value or worth in getting a high salary because you were paying 75% of it in tax. Now there were benefits. They used to have holiday vacation homes on the beach where they'd get effectively a free vacation. they'd have a nice vehicle. They'd have an executive dining room that it would have a French cordon bleu chef. So there were those sort of things. But in terms of the payments, the cash they made. Now the tax rate of 75%, or 80% close on, or even higher in some cases, that's dropped down to, when you look at deductions and how the accountants can manipulate the income, that's dropped down to sort of between 40 and 50%. So they get these people get so salaries though have gone. There was a differential between the lowest paid and the highest paid in CEO to shop floor of 5 times. Now that differential, given the lower tax rate, is getting close to 200 times. So instead of 5 times, now 200 times difference between the CEO. And typically they're facing much less competition, commercial competition, than they did back in the day. So anybody, Mickey Mouse and Blind Freddie could run the business today. And because there's so little competition, oligopolies and duopolies and monopolies and also cartels and so on dominate the landscape all across the Western world today. So there's a very different sort of, and the crony parasite thing is very much alive and well. Should those people be taxed heavily? Well, yeah, I mean, sure, because they produce nothing. Should they be also taxed on the amount of real estate and other things? Well, yeah. And because of their front row seat now in the captains of industry at the apex and so on, they're also given front row seats on the best insider trading deals on the share market and insider trading deals on real estate. There's going to be a new road and a new shopping centre built down there, but keep it quiet. But why don't you buy up as much real estate as you can in the area? It'll double in value overnight once these announcements, that sort of thing. That's widespread. Should that be taxed? But how can you effectively separate the parasites from the most productive? Because if you're going to tax the most productive heavily, then yes, that is a problem. That is, the whole of society will suffer from it. If you tax the parasites, then it's not a problem because they've done nothing and have not earned in any way the income they're receiving. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback Channel. Thank you for listening.